everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Seoul, the U.S. Army base in Pyeongtaek, the White House and the Pentagon. These are the major sites North Korea claims to have taken pictures of using its military spy satellite. The regime is yet to disclose the images, and so both South Korea and the U.S. are casting doubt over the claims, with Washington even saying there are plenty of such images available online. Meanwhile, North Korea began restoring guard posts and beefing up its military presence at the DMZ after declaring that it would no longer be bound by the 2018 Inter-Korean Military Agreement. How did the experts see North Korea's claims related to the satellite images, and what should South Korea's diplomatic strategy be? For more on this, we invite Doctor Go Myong-hyun, a senior fellow at the Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Dr. Go.
It's good to be here.
And we also have Dr. Mark Berry, Associate Editor Emeritus of the International Journal on World Peace. Good to see you, Dr. Berry.
And good evening to both of you.
Good evening. Now, first question to our Dr. Go. So North Korea claims that its recently launched military satellite took photos of major South Korean and U.S. military bases along with the White House and the Pentagon. But it hasn't revealed those images. So what is North Korea trying to say?
So there are two dimensions to this, as always, when it comes to North Korea. One is a strategic dimension. North Korea had promised to perfect its military satellite technology within 5 years time frame. They first announced their weapons development roadmap back in 2021, and they've been completing different weapon system development step by step. And this is one of the ones that they unveiled and succeeded finally after 3 tries before the end of the year. So the reason why North Korea wants to have a military surveillance satellite is because they need to have, in order to make sure that the claim of North Korea as a nuclear state, they need to demonstrate the capability to detect the opponent's possible nuclear attacks using missiles. That means North Korea should deploy in space many different military surveillance satellites. This is just one of the first ones. I mean, essentially, that's what the North Koreans are claiming. So again, this is a strategic dimension of North Korea's military surveillance satellite, reconnaissance satellite. And the technological dimension is also there. This is the first time North Korea claims to have succeeded in putting in orbit a military surveillance and reconnaissance satellite. But then this is just a proof of concept. So what North Korea is saying with the claims that they have taken pictures of major South Korean and American bases, as well as the White House and the Pentagon, is that they have demonstrated a proof of concept, but at the same time, they're not claiming that they have a cutting-edge surveillance, space-based surveillance capability. So what North Korea has done all this time is that they demonstrate a proof of concept, such as with the ICBMs or like other types of cutting-edge weapon systems. At the first glance, they are pretty limited, but then over time, they perfect that weapon system. So in that sense, even though this the satellite that they have put on the orbit this time is very primitive and probably not threatening by any means, but then in the sense that this is the beginning of their successful development of this technology, this represents a major threat.
Right, so it's basically boasting that it has cutting-edge technology.
They attain that cutting-edge technology eventually.
I see. Now, Dr. Berry, we know that North Korea had long been working on a spy satellite launch, but some say Pyongyang hurried, as South Korea was originally scheduled to launch its own domestically developed satellite on November 30th in California, though it was postponed. Now, what is your view on this?
Well, absolutely. They wanted the bragging rights. But again, the domestic audience is the primary audience for this. It's very important for North Korea to be able to tell its elite that it's achieving its goals, it's making steady progress, and to be able to beat South Korea by a few days, even though the quality of the satellites is completely different, is extremely important to North Korea. So I think the real reason they've done it is not to send a message to the outside world, but it's a way of continued regime cohesion, and to show that the things that North Korea is investing in now, which is the satellites and the nuclear capabilities, the overall missile capabilities, are worth sticking with the regime. And this is really what I think Kim Jong-un is telling his elite, which is, I deliver, stay with me.
Right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, back to the images. The quality of images has yet to be confirmed, like I said before, and it will take some time for us to know its capability. But though you have already mentioned that it could be quite primitive, if it does have the capability to match the Pyongyang's claims, is that a major threat to Seoul and Washington?
Well, not per se, I would say. So those reports so far indicates that North Korea's spy satellite contains off-the-shelf civilian components, meaning that these are probably not the military-grade cutting-edge spy satellite that they have put on the orbit. But then, putting on the capability to put on satellite on any object into a stable orbit implies that they have other types of capabilities. So the fact of the matter is that the North Korean spy satellite is probably primitive and has low resolution imagery capabilities. In that sense, the Washington's claim is right that the North Korea didn't have to spend so much money in developing this technology. They could have just bought photos from private sources or like commercial databases. But then the implication here is that if North Korea can put on orbit a military spy satellite, they can put other types of objects, for instance, satellites that can attack other satellites, and also as other types of weaponization. And then he also demonstrates a sophisticated control of the space vehicle. So these are all technologies and capabilities that could be put in use to other uses. So in that sense, I think we should, if we look beyond the spy satellite itself, it shows that North Korea is staying quite a high level of technological development when it comes to space.
Right. And what makes matters worse is that, Dr. Berry, if Pyongyang goes on with additional launches, perhaps with Russia's help, like our Dr. Go said, there is the possibility of much more advanced satellites being launched, right? How should South Korea deal with this?
My main advice is don't overreact. I think that what they are demonstrating is they have the capability, but for them it's step by step, and it's been baby steps. Of course, just as their nuclear program has advanced, but not advanced as far as we might have feared, and certainly their missile capability has advanced, but maybe not quite to the point that we would be really concerned and afraid. It's serious, but we should not overreact. The most important thing is that these outward developments are symptoms of an internal situation, and oftentimes astute politics and diplomacy can deal with these aspects of the military advancement with North Korea. So my feeling is this calls for caution. This calls for a great deal of astuteness in the situation to be able to keep our tempers down and our responses measured.
Right. So the bottom line would be that we should not overreact to Pyongyang's such provocations. Right. Now, Dr. Go, in response to North Korea's such satellite launch, South Korea suspended partially the 2018 tension reduction deal. For those who might not be familiar with this, first of all, what is this military agreement, and what measures have followed the suspension?
So this is essentially the idea of deconflicting the tension between the two sides, between North Korea and South Korea. So it involves measures to avoid accidental clashes and escalation. For instance, North Korea and South Korea agreed to dismantle some of the guard posts that are located in the DMZ, so that it makes sure that there's more separation between the two sides. That in that way, they will avoid prevent the possibility of accidental exchange of fires. There's that, and there's also the agreement not to conduct military drills within certain distance of the military demarcation line. Again, this is the idea that the military drill could be confused with an actual attack. So these are all measures to lower the chance of accidental clashes between the two sides. There are also confidence-building measures, meaning they're essentially trying to foster trust on each other's side. And this, for instance, North Korea and South Korea agreed to always keep it open channels of communication. So this is another attempt to make sure that there are no accidental clashes. And also, to demonstrate, trust in these measures, North Korea and South Korea agreed to implement no-fly zones around the military demarcation line. And this actually has become a thorny issue, especially for South Korea, because it maintains technological superiority over North Korea when it comes to intelligence gathering, surveillance, and reconnaissance. So because this no-fly zone prevented South Korean military from conducting monitoring patrols, it essentially reduced the time frame for South Korea to respond to the kind of provocation that North Korea had launched back in 2010, which led to casualties on the South Korean side, both civilian and military. So these are the measures that form part of the comprehensive military agreement between the North Korea and South Korea. But then North Korea have been consistently and systematically violating this agreement. For instance, North Korea blew up the Joint Liaison's office based in Kaesong Industrial Complex back in 2020. That was a major flagrant violation of the CMA. And there's also, North Korea also conducted military drills. For instance, North Korea launched ballistic missiles, not ballistic missiles, but a large caliber artillery, which are essentially rockets that are landed within this so-called like a no-fly separation zone between the two Koreas. So it's been going on ever since North Korea signed this agreement in a way. But it was for political reasons that South Korea held back from canceling this agreement. But now South Korea has tried to use this agreement or like a partial cancellation of this agreement also leverage on North Korea not to increase their level of provocations, but North Korea again showed that they didn't really care. So I think this is the reason why South Korea wants to send a strong signal by resuming the monitoring patrols over the demarcation line. And what North Koreans did in response was to rebuild those guard posts that they had disbanded back in 2018. So again, this increased the tension around the DMZ, but at the same time, it actually strengthens South Korea's ability to watch and monitor North Korea's movement.
All right. Now, that being said, to South Korea's such partial suspension, Dr. Barry, North Korea announced that it will fully pull out of the agreement and restore guard posts, dispatching soldiers and equipment to the demilitarized zone. What does that hint at?
Well, I think, as some of the American analysts are saying, 10 or 11 guard posts around the joint security area is not going to create a major escalation of tensions in and of itself. But the fact that South Korea wanted to or declared it would pull out of one of the provisions was a political escalation, and by doing so, North Korea overinterpreted that, but in a sense unavoidably had to declare that it was pulling out of the entire agreement. And I believe the reason is because it was Kim Jong-un that signed the 2018 Comprehensive Military Agreement. And so this was an insult to the dignity of the North Korean Supreme Leader. So it's done for political reasons, not so much for the military reasons. And I regret that this has happened because it's an unnecessary escalation of tensions on both sides. I understand that Secretary of Defense Austin and new Joint Chiefs Chairman Brown were in Seoul recently. I'm sure the matter came up. I'm sure they expressed their views, but they presumably assumed that this was a bilateral issue between the two Koreas, and this is what happened. But it's not for anyone's betterment. It's going to keep the tensions at a higher level than they should have been. And in many ways, it's, as that movie series was called, it's Back to the Future. We're moving backward.
Right, I see your point, Dr. Barry. Now, Dr. Go, and regarding all this, North Korea claimed that South Korea was the one that breached this military agreement, citing joint military drills. This is North Korea's usual tactics of blaming South Korea for the tension on the peninsula, right?
Yeah, that's exactly the point here. I think North Korea has been always justifying their provocations, even the unprovoked ones, by referring to previous South Korean actions. The joint military drills they're probably referring to are the joint military, the military drills they're referring to are probably the joint military drills that South Korea and the United States conducted together. But then the agreement doesn't prevent either side from conducting joint military drills away from the DMZ. So in that sense, I think North Koreans are again, making this claim in order to shift the blame onto South Korea rather than themselves. But then this is an old history. I don't think North Korea has the credibility left anymore to claim that or like convince anybody that's indeed the case.
All right. Now, meanwhile, Dr. Berry, the IAEA confirmed that the Yongbyon nuclear site is running again, saying there were indications of ongoing operation. Now, what does the Yongbyon site hold? And since Pyongyang is enjoying closer ties with Russia than ever before, would it give the regime more confidence to conduct a seventh nuclear test?
Well, to my recollection, it's been operating more often than not. It was down for about 3 or 4 weeks. And as soon as we see certain steam and smoke and so forth, we can assume that they're back to uranium reprocessing and enrichment, which is their chief facility to do so. But it's a facility that had been visited by both U.S. officials and private sector experts like Siegfried Hecker, formerly of Stanford, up through about 2010. But American officials have not really had a chance to take a look at all of the changes in the first person, actually on site. But my basic view is that it's like keeping the kettle on the stove on simmer. They want to make sure that everything is ready to turn up the temperature when and if necessary. But we have to presume that they continue to reprocess. And as far as any lead up to a potential seventh nuclear test, I think there'll be plenty of advance warning, many, many indications if that were to come to that. But at the same time, it's been very clear to me over the last year and a half that President Xi does not want to see a seventh nuclear test. And although improved relations with Russia, at least maybe the best they've been since 1991, might suggest a little more wiggle room for the North to conduct a test. It's not in Putin's interest to wink his eye and say, go right ahead if you want, because he's very dependent on President Xi as well. President Putin is actually a junior partner for President Xi, and this is a very interesting, larger dynamic that affects North Korean decision-making, and it does not really give them the scope of choices that they really want at this time.
Right. So it's not highly likely that North Korea would go on with the seventh nuclear test, considering its relationship with China and Russia.
Correct.
I see. Now, Dr. Go, now to international reaction. Foreign Minister Park Jin recently held bilateral talks with his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi. And while tapping into the North Korean issue, Wang Yi said that China is going to play a certain role in order to ensure the stability of the Korean Peninsula. Is this just a continuation of what Beijing had been said up until now?
Yeah, no, I think in a way the Chinese have been very consistent when it comes to Korean Peninsula affairs. They always emphasize stability in the Korean Peninsula because it definitely serves China's interest. China is very much focused on, China essentially has a lot of issues on its hands right now. There's the internal issue of the economic recession, and there's also the tension between China and the United States in many areas, not just in geopolitical issues like Taiwan, but also in the technological sector. And so these are the challenges that China faces right now. So it doesn't want to be distracted or have to refocus their attention to the essentially a very key region for them, which is the Korean Peninsula. Again, Beijing and Shanghai, these are the two biggest cities in China. They only lie 1 hour away from Seoul by commercial flight. That's how close China is to the Korean Peninsula hotspot. So that's always been, the stability has always been China's principle and also priority. But then I think when China, the Wang Yi, the foreign minister, is mentioning about certain role that China can fulfill for the stability, I think what China is referring to is the resumption of the six-party talks. I think there's an intention or like willingness on the part of the Chinese government to broker some sort of negotiation or the dialogue between the two Koreas, but involving United States and China. And the reason is because again, also Russia and Japan. The reason is because China also doesn't want to see the formation of essentially a coalition of blocs in Northeast Asia. So essentially, that would be North Korea, Russia, and China on one hand, and Korea, Japan, and the United States on the other hand. So then for the Chinese, this is exactly the worst-case scenario for them because they fear that such a close trilateral, for instance, alliance between Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington could lead to the beginning of a mini NATO in Northeast Asia, which is the worst-case scenario for Beijing. So in order to forestall such a scenario from playing out, China wants to put an alternative on the table, and that's the tried and true six-party talks, which failed because it didn't prevent North Korea from developing nuclear weapons. But again, there are many fans of that framework, both in and out of the region. So I think China was a major protagonist of that framework back in the time. So I think this is something that China is going to push more and more onto Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo in the near future.
All right, I see. Now, Dr. Berry, we are running out of time, but I'd like to ask you this last question. So tension is heightening more than ever. In what direction should South Korea's security strategy go, given that North Korea successfully launched the spy satellite?
Well, you know, on October 6th, we thought that the Middle East was quiet, and then came the events of October 7th. Many observers are saying now, some weeks later, that if a two-state solution is now being recommended for Israel and Palestine, and it had been advocated for many, many years and even decades, why was it allowed to fester? Why was this idea allowed to fester? So I would say with the situation in the Korean Peninsula, you need a comprehensive solution in the next couple of years to stabilize the situation and end the technical state of war. You can't allow the situation to fester as it is because it's not going to get better. North Korea is going to always try one-upsmanship, and frankly, it's very tempting when they do that for South Korea to demonstrate its own military and technological superiority. But this is very bad for the entire East Asia region, and it's very bad when there's already two hot wars going on around the world. So we need a more comprehensive solution, and one that will be taken seriously by all the major powers of the world. And in that sense, China's not all wrong. You know, you probably need some resumption of something like the six-party talks, but you probably have to jettison Russia and call it the five-party talks. But China is, after all, the signatory to the Korean armistice. And so it does make sense. But we need to end this kind of cycle of escalation that will head us into the unknown. We thought the Middle East was quiet, and it's not been that way since October 7th. Let's learn the lesson from that.
All right, I see your point, Dr. Berry. We need a comprehensive solution to tackle this issue. All right, well, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Berry and Dr. Go, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it. All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.